It's its own subculture at this point. It's taken on a life of its own that kind of almost expands upon Elvis.
So why Elvis?
For me, it's just a very deeply personal relationship that goes back to a strong memory I have when I was about, I think maybe 5 years old. I have this memory of looking through my mother's record collection, and I remember saying to my mum, well, who's this? What is this? And she said, oh, that's the king of rock and roll. That's Elvis Presley. So we put the record on, and that first side was full of all of those classic rock and roll tunes: Blue Suede Shoes, Hound Dog, King Creole, Jailhouse Rock. And my mind was blown by hearing that music for the first time. And from then on, I was just totally hooked. Even if I was thinking about other things, doing other things in my life growing up, I always had Elvis in the back of my head, always listening to that music, and then evolving my interest as I grew up and got older.
Does that seem to be a uniquely Elvis thing? That people seem to get into Elvis more than they get into other musical artists? Because you always hear about Elvis impersonators. You don't necessarily hear about other tribute artists or impersonators.
I think there has to be. There was something larger than life about Elvis. I mean, we think about superheroes a lot today, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and things like that. And Elvis, in a sense, was almost like the original pop music superhero. For those who saw it for the first time, must have been quite an interesting experience. And if you were young, it would have been extremely exciting. If you were a bit older, you probably would have found it, obviously, a bit grating. Who's this guy, thrusting his hips on stage and singing, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog"? And what does that even mean? That's not a beautiful love song. That's not very descriptive. That's just crude and rude. But what it was is it was a visceral connection to the music, rather than it just being a man standing on a stage singing about a beautiful day, isn't this lovely, with my beautiful lady walking down the street, or whatever. It was someone feeling the music and expressing it through their body in a way that no one had ever really done before. And the amazing thing with Elvis is that he expresses the feeling of what you're listening to, even if you're just listening to the record, and then you see him perform it, and it's 3D then, it's even bigger. And that didn't just apply to rock and roll, it applied to beautiful ballads, it applied to gospel, it applied to soul, every genre that Elvis touched.
So when did you start the impersonating?
I think I started to sing at home when I was about 13, 14 years old. I started to experiment with playing the piano a little bit, trying to play some songs. And but I didn't perform in public until I think I was 17. And I went to a karaoke night with a friend. And I remember I was really nervous about getting up and singing, but I really wanted to do an Elvis song. And in fact, I picked the song "It's Now or Never," which is appropriate if you think about the title. It's now or never. I'm going to do it. I've got to do it now. And it was very scary, but I enjoyed the experience, and it came off well. And I started just going regularly to karaoke nights with friends. And I always did Elvis songs. I was such a nerd about it. By that point in my life, I knew so much about Elvis's music. I would bring my own custom backing tracks with me to the karaoke night, and I'd give them a CD and say, put this on, with random obscure songs, that most people never heard of, a lot of them. But I just loved singing. So I became known as the Elvis guy, in the neighborhood. And eventually it was really just suggested to me. It was never my plan to be an Elvis impersonator or an Elvis tribute, whatever you want to call it. It was just someone said, why don't you try doing a show? You love Elvis. You always do Elvis songs. Why don't you do a show for a bit of fun? And I thought, that's a cool idea. And funnily enough, around the same time, one of the pubs I sang in were having a Christmas party, and they needed a slot filled for an entertainer. And they said, why don't you come and do some Elvis songs? I really, took it seriously and did the show. And that was back in 2002, just after Christmas in 2002. And it just built from there. More people just started offering me opportunities to do shows because they saw me, and just got working on the circuit. And now I travel all over the world doing an Elvis show. And it's crazy because it was never my career plan. It just happened. And it's just like an elaborate hobby in my head. And I feel like at some point I've got to stop and figure out what my real career is going to be. But I've been doing it over 20 years now, so I guess I'm stuck with it, for better or for worse.
That's the thing, right? Like, and I don't want this to sound a certain way, but like, this is not my world. So to me, it's kind of, Like, why would someone do this? Why would someone go watch someone do this? What do you think is the big appeal for people to come and see an Elvis impersonator?
I think it's that longing to see Elvis. Elvis was always described as one of the most electrifying performers to see in the flesh, you know. Unfortunately, I was born 7 years after he died, so I obviously never got the chance to do it, and so many people didn't get a chance to see him.
Like, would you say for somebody who maybe didn't experience how big Elvis was, who would kind of be the closest other artist that you'd be like, it was like that, but maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more?
That's a really good question. I think there are a variety of artists throughout music history who have become incredibly famous, incredibly culturally significant. I mean, you could say today Taylor Swift would be the most culturally significant musician in the world, but it's difficult to compare to Elvis because every artist is unique, but he was very unique in the symbolism of what his performances did to culture and music. Going back to the mid-1950s when he emerged, he was the symbol of this new movement of rock and roll, and that was the birth of that teenage culture, and that's carried on through music history ever since then. So he's so important because he's so symbolic of the creation of that. He is kind of the first thing you think of when you think of rock and roll, as you think of Elvis.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? Like, I can think of some other really big artists. You mentioned Taylor Swift or Michael Jackson, but they weren't necessarily symbols of a cultural shift at the same time. And they also weren't movie stars. So he had kind of the trifecta going.
And one of the very endearing things about Elvis Presley was that he had a lot of vulnerability as an artist. He was incredibly dynamic on stage, but he wasn't an arrogant performer. He didn't assume anyone was going to enjoy what he was doing.
What's the hardest part to get right? You talked about the movement, the voice, the look. What's generally the hardest part for people to get right?
I think that's quite individual. I'm quite lucky in that I'm able to do naturally quite a good impression of Elvis's voice when I'm singing. But then there might be someone who just naturally looks a lot like him. So they've got the look nailed, right, without having to do much. When I go on stage, I put a lot of contouring and highlighting on my face. I've got a smaller, rounder face than Elvis, so I try to elongate it with makeup, etc.
What for you was the thing that you really had to work at?
I'd say the number one thing I've worked at over the years is improving my look. But also, I'd say aspects of his movement, because I grew up loving his concert years, the 1970s. That was really my great love, even though I mentioned to you when I first discovered it as a kid, it was all about the 50s, and that was initially what I was into. But as I grew up, I got into the later stuff, the Vegas, the jumpsuits, all that stuff. So I find that aspect of Elvis's dancing movement quite straightforward. Not all of it's easy to do, but it's so deeply ingrained because I've seen so many hours of video and I've done it so much. But if I'm performing as the young Elvis, and his dancing was very different when he was younger, it was a totally different style, it was more jive-based, I find that much harder, partly because I don't do it so often, but also it wasn't my particular interest. The irony is that I started off when I was 20 trying to be the 40-year-old Elvis, and now that I'm 40, I'm doing more and more of the 20-year-old Elvis.
Now, is this a full-time living?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just ask you, how much money do you make?
Every year it's different, because it depends on what work you get. But what I will say is that it's a reasonable living. It's a reasonable living. It's above average for me.
6 figures or high fives? Sounds like high fives, low sixes.
High fives.
That's pretty good.
But there are guys out there who are well into the 6 figures. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how many, but there are quite a few who are up there.
Where is that? Is that just from like performing, or is it from, okay, you can sell merchandise, or you can, like, where is the money made, so to speak?
Most of the money will come from theatre productions, big concerts, because they're the big gates. So those certain Elvis tribute artists who work big theatre tours and big concert tours, they're the ones who are going to make the most money, because I do that as well, but I don't do it on the same scale as some of those guys. And I also do a mixture of lots of other things. I do hotels, I do festivals, I do race courses, and I do private events. They're all a bit different.
How competitive is the industry?
Very competitive. It's also, in a nice way, it's actually mostly very pleasant in terms of how we all interact with each other. We kind of call ourselves a brotherhood of Elvis tributes because we all share this incredibly unique thing that doesn't really exist anywhere else. I mean, like you say, there've been huge artists like the Beatles, like Michael Jackson, but you don't get Michael Jackson tribute festivals like you do with Elvis tribute festivals. You know, it's such a unique world, and we all talk about songs and makeup and dancing and sideburns and silly stuff that no one else would ever really understand in the way we do in the context we're talking about.
Are you ready for some harder/listener submitted questions?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Easiest song, hardest song?
Easiest song would be something that just doesn't really challenge your range in any way and is quite simple, straightforward. Something like Love Me Tender, pretty simple. Hard to... There are nuances to it, but it's hard to sound really bad singing that song, I'd say. Hardest song, again, it does depend on the individual and what their natural range is. One would be considered to be one of the hardest songs would be a song called Hurt, which Elvis recorded 1976, the year before he died, because it has a big range. It has a very operatic sound, which is the sound that Elvis had developed by that time in his voice. But it also has some big notes at the end that are very exposed. It's kind of just like a drum roll underneath while the big notes are hit. So you can't hide behind an orchestra. You can't sort of pull the microphone away if you're having a bad vocal day. You're exposed to everybody singing it. So from that point of view, it's both hard technically, but it's mostly hard psychologically because you're being exposed. You know, if you get it wrong, you got nowhere to go.
Parts of the country / parts of the world that are really into Elvis. Like, you know, if you're going to this location, they are all about it.
Honestly, you will find big groups of Elvis fans almost anywhere. The UK in particular has a very big following of Elvis, one of the biggest outside of the United States. Australia is also another place which has a big following. Countries where you see a lot of Elvis tributes traveling to and working in is a good indicator that they've got a big following. But around Europe, the Netherlands, Germany, which I'm off to in a few days, you know, there are specific countries which have very passionate followings. But honestly, I think virtually any country, Japan has a massive Elvis following. The former Japanese Prime Minister was a huge Elvis fan, and he was given a private tour of Graceland a few years ago. So pretty much anywhere you go, there are Elvis fans.
What are some of your favorite little Elvis gestures, like little things that he would do with his face, with his movements, those kind of things?
One of them would just be this kind of, I mean, the obvious one is the lip, obviously, you know, and he'd tell jokes about that, like, you know, I got a fish hook right here, you know, they said he's trying to be sexy. No, I got a fish hook right here, you know, and silly things like that, you know. That's the obvious one everyone knows. But just things like looking around and just sort of going, you know, blowing his lips a bit like, wow, this is a big thing, you know. Another thing he'd do is sort of, he'd make little jokey gestures with his face. Because the thing with Elvis is that he had a great sense of humor as a performer as well. He didn't take himself too seriously. He took his music seriously, but never himself too seriously. So he'd do sort of, you know, he'd cross his eyes or do this, you know, look around in funny ways. And putting those little bits into the show, I think, helps to create that sense of him as a person.
On a scale of 1 to 10, like 1 is me trying to do Elvis, 10 is Elvis himself. How close to that 10 would you say that you get, and how close would most impersonators get?
That's a hard question. I could get in trouble for saying this. I don't know whether to be bolshy or whether to be to be conservative. You know, just so I don't offend anybody, right? No one's a perfect 10. Obviously, if perfect 10 is Elvis himself, no one's a perfect 10. If the very best Elvis tributes in the world were, let's say a 9, just to sake of argument. You could say they're 8, 7, 6, whatever. Let's say they're a 9. I think it's very hard to say exactly based on everything. You could say vocally, I give myself a 9 on sounding like Elvis in most of what I do. Vocal technique, probably would give myself a 9, maybe a 7 or an 8. But actual sort of singing technique. But sounding like Elvis, yeah, I think not everything, but certain songs I can sound a lot like Elvis. Um, but so I'd probably give myself, when I combine all my look and my moves and everything, I'd probably give myself around, let's say, an 8, maybe. If the very best a 9, I give myself an 8. I could be a 9 though. I have the skill to the innate skill to be, but I just have to get off my ass and go to the gym basically, put a bit more work into it. But your average Elvis tribute that you might see, the average level, well, I guess it sounds crap to say, but let's say it's 5, right? You know, it's about 5. You know, there are something like 55,000 Elvis tributes in the world is the last figure I heard quoted, which is kind of crazy.
Do you inadvertently end up looking like Elvis all the time? Like, in order to kind of appear like Elvis on the stage, do you basically have to look like Elvis all the time in real life?
Well, as you can see from this video, obviously I've got sideburns and I've got a bit of the Elvis hair going on here. So you don't have to do that. I was talking the other day to a very famous Elvis tribute. He's completely bald. So you would not see him in the street and think Elvis, because he just sticks it on. If you are in my position, you do inadvertently get attention for being Elvis, and people will look and go, right, Elvis, right. You know, this is a British accent coming out. Right, Elvis. Or they'll go, or they'll just walk past and go, and you know, oh, great, yeah, thanks. Never heard that one before.
Every job has its ups and downs,
Absolutely.
right?
It's not a bad down, to be fair.
Like, if you're obviously looking and sounding like Elvis, you know how some people are. Does Elvis impersonation have some residual benefits after the show? Are people like, oh, I've always wanted to hook up with Elvis?
This is a question I asked my wife when we first met. I said, is it about me or is it about Elvis? Because we actually met when I was presenting an award ceremony dressed as Elvis. So she said, no, don't worry, it's not about Elvis. Although she did tell me a story, because she's a little slightly older than me, my wife, and she was 3 when Elvis died. And apparently she cried and told her mum that she was really upset because one day she was supposed to marry Elvis, is what she said as a 3-year-old, apparently. So marrying me, you know, not the same thing, but sort of. But no, she doesn't feel that way. But it does make you wonder, you know. It's part of the appeal. If you can, Elvis was an incredibly handsome man. Let's be honest, he's one of the best looking men ever, I think. So if you're handsome naturally, if you can look handsome on stage, that does help, because the sex appeal is part of the appeal. I'll tell this story. This is almost embarrassing, but I'll tell this story that I did a show at a nudist camp a few years ago. I didn't know it was a nudist camp before I got there, by the way. And they said, "Don't worry, we'll put our clothes on for the actual show," you know. And most of them did, apart from some middle-aged men who didn't. Sort of stood in doorways, you know, leaning against the door frame, looking at me like this. You know? So I spent most of the time looking at the ceiling. But afterwards, I'll never forget this. The lady who booked me for the show, she said, "We loved the show. Thank you so much. We're all going to get in the hot tub now." She said, "It's an 8-person tub, but we can usually squeeze about 16 of us in it. And we'd love to invite you to join us. But there's one rule. You're not allowed to wear swimming trunks, because that contaminates the water." Apparently. So that's the proposition that always sticks with me. 8-person tub, 16 of us, no trunks. So to which I politely declined. I'm terribly sorry, I've got to get home. You know, but yeah. So yeah, it can happen.
So wait, he performed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right?
Yeah.
Is there a harder decade to do? Like, what's the hardest decade to impersonate Elvis? 50s, 60s, 70s?
Some guys will find the 50s straightforward and the 70s really hard, or the other way around. I think it partly depends on what you've done the most in your career, but also I think it depends on what naturally you have. I mean, Elvis's voice changed a lot from the 50s to the 70s. His voice got a lot deeper, a lot richer in the 70s, partly because he took up smoking quite a lot, like cigars and things, so that darkened his tone quite a lot. But also he was older, he gained more of an operatic singing style. For me, the 50s is the scariest era to do, because I don't do it very often. I normally am that Vegas Elvis, or the sort of Elvis from his comeback special in the late 60s. The movies are kind of an in-between. But there's some really hard technical dancing actually in the movie stuff. Elvis was a great dancer, and he did some of his best dance routines in movies. Jailhouse Rock is a famous dance that he does in the late 50s, but throughout the 60s, things like Viva Las Vegas and various other songs, Bossa Nova Baby, they're complex dance moves, really, really you need good coordination, good core strength, good practice to do that well. Not everyone does it particularly well. So, yeah, I'd say it's very much an individual thing, which era is the hardest.
Where do you get the clothes?
Well, luckily enough, there are a lot of vendors out there providing wares for Elvis tributes because the Elvis tribute business is big. It's big business. It still is big business. In fact, it's getting bigger still, which is amazing. So there are several companies who make replica Elvis outfits. Most of mine come from an American company called B&K Enterprises, and they actually partnered with the original designers of Elvis's outfits to buy the patterns, the designs, and they actually had one of Elvis's original designers on their books working for them for many years, actually making the outfits. So you can't get really any more authentic than that, of actually buying a suit that is derived from those original patterns and designs. But there are other fantastic vendors around the world as well who also make amazing replicas. They're expensive, they're big investments, they cost thousands of dollars, these outfits, but they're the tools of your trade.
This is kind of a deeper question. Do you think that what role did Elvis's end kind of have on his legacy? Do you think him dying at a relatively young age kind of cemented it and increased his legacy? Or do you think that it kind of took away from him ultimately?
I think it's both. I think dying young always, always, I'm not saying a good thing, it's not a good thing, but it freezes you in time as never having gone old. And you think of people like James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, members of that 27 club, right? A lot of people who died at 27, they never got old. So they're always that way in people's minds. The problem with Elvis was he did die young, but he died in an unfortunate way young. Obviously, the manner of his death was unfortunate, and it's open to ridicule and things like that. In reality, it was a horrible way to die, right? He had a huge heart attack while on the toilet, terrible, terrible thing. But also, of course, those last few years before he died, his physical appearance had gone downhill a lot. He had a lot of health problems in his later life. Obviously, his drug problems are well documented, but he also had some hereditary problems, and he suffered all kinds of consequences as a result of those health issues. Many people in his family actually died in their 40s as well, including his mother.
What is your favorite Elvis conspiracy theory?
My favorite Elvis conspiracy theory. Well, yeah, to come back to something, is the idea that Elvis had multiple brothers. So it wasn't just him, because a lot of people know that Elvis had a stillborn twin called Jesse Garon, who died at birth, very sadly. But there are people who believe that Jesse didn't die. And in fact, he grew up with Elvis. And when Elvis became famous, it was kind of a persona that they both took on, and they would alternate. So you would see, in a certain movie or a certain scene or a certain concert, it's one of them, it's Elvis, let's say. And then the next night, Jesse's on stage. And, people show pictures of two different concerts and say, this one's Elvis, this one's Jesse. But it gets even weirder when it becomes a story about how there were multiple brothers. So there's one called Tony, and there's one called David, and there's 4 or 5 or 6 of them apparently, that no one ever realized that there were all these brothers living. I guess they were all living at Graceland in Memphis, right? But they just would sort of tag in and out wrestling style, I don't know, and sort of swap. And they all kind of got the same health problems at the same time, and put on weight at the same time, and all died at the same time, maybe, I don't know. But that's the weirdest and most ridiculous conspiracy theory that I've heard. But it just kind of makes me laugh, that one, because it's so silly.
Where do you think the future goes for yourself, for Elvis, the world of Elvis impersonation? Like, what do you think the future holds? Is this declining, rising, staying the same?
It's its own subculture at this point. It's taken on a life of its own that kind of almost expands upon Elvis. What's interesting is that some of the most famous Elvis tribute artists now, they're still dressing as Elvis, doing his songs, etc. But they've kind of expanded the horizons in terms of the entertainment value, the presentation of the shows in a way that Elvis never really did. But it's very popular. I'm confident about the future of Elvis fandom because it's not just people who grew up with Elvis who are coming to see shows, it's kids. I mean, I can tell you the number of children who come to my shows dressed in Elvis suits, and they come up afterwards and they meet me and they have a picture and they say, I want to be an Elvis tribute when I'm older. It's taken on a life of its own, which is kind of beyond Elvis. I think Elvis's mind would be blown by this, to be honest, because he was always worried that people would forget him overnight. He used to have nightmares about that everyone would somehow realize he was no good and they'd forget about him. But in a way, he's everlasting at this point.
That's pretty much all the questions we got. Like, what's kind of coming up next for you? Where can people find you? That kind of stuff.
Well, my stage name is JD King. And if you go onto Google, you put JD King Elvis in, you'll find my website with all my show listings. I'm just off to Germany for a special Elvis 90th birthday celebration. It would have been Elvis's 90th birthday tomorrow, the 8th of January, from when we're recording this on the 7th. So, yeah, there's a load of events going on to celebrate that. And I'll be touring around Europe this year. I'll be going back over to the States probably in the summer to Memphis for Elvis Week during August. So hopefully see some folks on your side of the pond then, maybe. So yeah, a full diary of all kinds of interesting things going on from any kind of place you could imagine because there are Elvis fans everywhere, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.